The Moab 240 is a 240-mile race in southern Utah in the US that takes runners from the desert to the mountains and back again, over the course of 3 to about 5 days, depending on your pace. And like with any race, there's quite a bit of required gear, as well as some other considerations, like how to deal with all that desert sand. I ran the race back in October of 2023, but I never did publish a detailed breakdown of the gear that I used, so I thought I would do that now, along with some other information on things like foot care, because I had quite a few questions about that since I published my film. So let's start with the required gear, and according to the runner's manual, this is gear for runners and pacers to carry at all times. And this includes a spot tracker, which is given to you by the race, a jacket with a hood, gloves, a hat or buff, pants or tights, they must cover the entire leg, a long sleeve insulating layer, a GPS device with the track loaded, a cell phone, an emergency bivvy, a headlamp or waist light, extra batteries for the lamp, a whistle, wag bags in case you have to go to the bathroom on course, and 500 extra calories, which are for emergency only, so on top of whatever you plan on eating throughout the race. And then there's a list of what they call recommended gear for runners and pacers to carry at all times. So not mandatory, but highly recommended. And this includes gaiters for the sand, a sun hat, as opposed to just a regular hat, a puffy jacket with a hood, a neck gaiter, an extra headlamp, extra batteries for that extra headlamp, a battery pack, presumably for your phone, toilet paper, wipes like wet wipes, Ziploc bags, sunscreen, capacity for 3 liters of water, along with a water filter, although there's not too much water to filter on course, your own first aid kit, and of course any personal medications that you might need. Now, I didn't carry all that myself. I did use gaiters for most of the race and a bucket hat as a sun hat, but I had fortunately AUDRÉE crewing me with a crew vehicle, so I was able to keep a lot of that sort of extra stuff that I might need throughout the race in the van. And along those lines, I also didn't have to use drop bags. But there are 12 aid stations out of the 16 total where you can leave drop bags, and they recommend things like earplugs and an eye mask, warm clothes, a sleeping bag, spare socks, spare shoes. I'd probably leave spare poles, spare headlamp, and spare batteries as well. Of course, you want to have extra run nutrition, electrolytes, things like that, so you can restock as you go. A charger along with a cable for your phone. If you're not carrying that with you, you'd want to have that in your drop bag. Spare sunscreen, so you can resupply on that as well. And then maybe a quick dry towel. So as I said, I had access to all those kind of things in the van, but that's definitely a list, or at least a starting point of things you would want to have in your drop bags. And probably redundant, you'd want to have several of those because you're going to have drop bags all over the course to use throughout the week. Okay, so let's start by talking about what I was wearing for the run itself from the bottom up, although I'm going to skip shoes. I'll come back to those at the end when I talk about foot care. And starting with socks, I use these from Drymax. They are the Light Mesh Quarter Crew. And the killer feature here is this mesh design at the top, which is very breathable, obviously important when running in the desert. They are synthetic and fairly durable, and I had a few pairs of these. I changed 3 or 4 times, which again, I'll talk more about at the end. And for shorts, I like the Solomon Cross with a 7-inch inseam, but no liner, because I prefer to layer this on top of Saks boxer briefs. I find that this is the best way to avoid chafing. And then moving up, for shirts, I wore the Solomon Cross Run t-shirt, which is synthetic polyester, quick dry, quite breathable, and fairly affordable, which is good because I changed a few times. I had several of these with me, and I am a size medium at 6 foot for reference for sizing. And as you probably know by now, along with the t-shirt, I like to wear sun sleeves. These are the Active Ice sun sleeve from Outdoor Research, and they can keep you warm at night, but they can also help protect you from sun exposure. They have a UV treatment, and I find that much more effective and just easier, frankly, than having to continually reapply sunscreen on my arms. And you can also get them wet if you cross a creek, and if you have access to ice, you can put ice under the sleeve as well. Then I had a buffer around my neck to protect my neck from the sun, which I could also wear at night when I took my hat off and put a headlamp on. But during the day, for the most part, I wore a bucket hat from Cieli. Cieli is the brand of most of the 5-panel hats that I wear as as well. And their bucket hat is quite good for sun protection. It's quite breathable. And these are machine washable and they maintain their shape as well. So you've heard me talk about them before, and I highly recommend CLE hats. And for navigation, I use the Coros Vertix 2. This is the newer 2S here. I had the route loaded on my watch as required. The course is flagged, it is marked, but sparsely. So navigation definitely is part of the challenge, part of the fun. And the Vertix series will last through the entire race without recharging, which is great as well. Now for mandatory gear, we needed a jacket with the hood. So I carried the Salomon Benatti waterproof jacket. I like hard shells, even though they weren't required in this case, because they do protect you from the rain in case it does rain, but they're also great insulating layers. And it did get quite cold, particularly on Shea Mountain. There was ice on the ground. So the waterproof jacket was definitely on then, as, like I said, more as an insulating layer. Along with the Salomon Benatti waterproof pants, we just needed something to cover the legs, and we had to carry that during the day, even in the sun. So for that reason, I used the waterproof pants because they're a little bit lighter than, say, a merino wool base layer would have been. Although I did have tights available as well in the truck. And then we had to carry a mid layer as well. So I had this merino wool long sleeve top from Icebreaker. And then these gloves from Arc'teryx. These are the Row. They're synthetic, quite thin, but still fairly durable. And they also have a nice long cuff as well, which I like. And then for headlamp, I used the HM65RDT from Phoenix. And this is similar to the HM65RT that I've talked about in the past, but this one has a warm spotlight, which is really nice, but otherwise is the same. It's very bright. You can get up to 400 lumens for up to 12 hours. So this will last throughout the entire night on a single charge, and it's got a BOA system for the strap, which I love. And then I did carry a spare battery as well, just in case. And I carried all of that in the Salomon Advanced Skin 12. It's a 12-liter running vest, along with the Salomon custom quiver for my poles. And I would have had two full flasks in the front at all times with NAC powder. And then in the back, I had a bladder with capacity for 1.5 liters of water. I don't normally use a bladder, but in this case I did because there were some long stretches without aid. And then I also had an empty flask in the back with a water filter. This is the Salomon XA filter cap. And so there weren't many opportunities to filter water, but we did cross a few creeks. So this definitely did come in handy. Now, I was definitely pushing the capacity of this 12-liter pack. As you saw, we had to carry jacket, pants, mid-layer, and that was at all times, even during the heat of the day, along with, of course, up to 3 liters of water at any given time, and a lot of food for hours in between aid stations. And that's on top of a headlamp and electronics, and in my case, even camera gear. So you might find that you would need even a 14 or 15-liter pack because the 12-liter was quite full. And I didn't carry a puffy jacket, although I definitely did use one for sleeping at night, and that's why it is part of the recommended gear. But you might find if you burn cooler, I burn quite warm when I run, you might find that you want to carry something like that with you during the run, because it does get very cold in the desert overnight. And for poles, I use the Lecky FX1 Super Lights. They have what's called the Shark system, which clips onto these little loops here with these gloves that you wear, and they're very lightweight, which is important because I carried these the entire time, even though I really only use them for the couple of big climbs. The race is for the most part quite runnable, but it does go above 11,000 feet twice, and that second climb comes when you're already pretty exhausted. So I would definitely recommend poles for this race. Okay, let's talk about briefly the logistics with regards to drop bags. Now, fortunately, as I said, I didn't need to use drop bags because I had AUDRÉE supporting me from a vehicle, from the Ross Monster Baja. And what that meant was that we could have a support kit that would follow me along. Whereas when you're using drop bags, you end up having to have duplicates of the same items. But the things you're definitely going to want are anything that are going to help you sleep at night. So that's, again, some of that recommended gear included an eye mask, earplugs, and definitely a puffy jacket, warmer the better, and likely even a sleeping bag because it gets so cold. And when your body's that exhausted, it really starts to shut down. You can really start to shiver, and that can affect the quality of your sleep. And if you are going to take time out of your race to sleep at an aid station, you want to make sure that you're focusing on the quality of sleep as much as the quantity. Okay, so let's talk about foot care now. And so I started the race in the Salomon S-Lab Ultra 3. These have been my go-to shoe for ultra distance races for a few years now. They work on all types of terrain. They just work really well for my foot. But having said that, When you're evaluating shoes, especially for a long race like this, a 240-mile race, it's more about fit and blister prevention than anything else. I would sooner have a shoe with an inappropriate outsole that I know is not going to cause me foot problems than finding a shoe that just is perfect for the terrain but doesn't quite fit my foot. And by the time you run a race like the Moab 240, hopefully you've kind of figured out your feet. Hopefully you've found shoes that just really work for your foot shape. But something that might be new for you is running in the deserts, and that's where you are dealing with sand. And so I wore these. These are some gaiters from Solomon. They actually have a little kind of pad that goes on the bone of your ankle that I cut out because I find those cause actually more problems than anything else. Now these ones were a little bit tight for me. This is a size small that I have from years ago, and that actually caused problems on the top of my foot. It was creating pressure, so I ended up pulling these off pretty early in the race that you might have noticed, which then led to a lot of sand entering my shoes. So that was a little bit of kind of a tactical error on my part because I had never worn these for that many hours. They were fine for sort of 6 to 8 hours, and then they started to cause problems. And that's something that can be new for people when they're running these longer distances, is something that works or fits you well for, again, 6 to 8 hours doesn't necessarily work after 20 hours or multiple days. And so I ended up with even more sand in my shoes than I anticipated, but that's okay because I had a plan for that. You would have noticed that I was doing regular foot baths roughly every 50 miles when I saw AUDRÉE. And the whole purpose of that was just to get rid of the fine sand that had accumulated on my feet and to basically give my feet a reset so that I could re-lube, use squirrel's nut butter. I put this just basically between the toes and on the outside of the toes, and then of course fresh socks. And then I did change my shoes once. Just after the halfway point during the race, I changed into these Solomon S-Lab Genesis, which just have a little bit more room in the toe box. They're just a little bit more comfortable fit, and they are designed for even longer distances. Similar sort of outsole, and again though, I was focused more on how my feet feel in these shoes, especially after a long period of time. And so I used these for the back half of the race, although realistically I could have just used these for the entire race, and that would have worked maybe a little bit better and simplified things for me as well. But the start of the race is a little bit more technical, so I wanted to have a little bit more proprioception and agility, which I find I get from the S-Lab Ultra 3. Now that foot care regimen, it did take some time. You know, I invested a few minutes over the course of the race. That added up. Call it an extra 15 minutes that I spent just taking care of my feet. But that 15 minutes I saw as an investment because that was probably what allowed me to keep moving and to basically finish the race with absolutely no foot problems, while other people, their feet were falling apart. So sometimes investing the time, taking care of blisters if you see anything developing, changing your socks, even changing your shoes can really be worth the time. It'll save you that time and potentially save your race in the long run as well. And last but not least, I use this, the Solomon Pulse Belt, really just for my camera gear. And I like this belt because it's quite simple. It's got a little pocket at the front that's zippered, and I usually keep spare memory cards and GoPro batteries. And then the back is where I keep my GoPro. I would have been using the GoPro Hero 11 at the time. I've since upgraded to the 12, and I have that on a little handle that can just slip here. I can tuck it in the back here, and it keeps that weight off of my pack. So it's just one less thing to carry in what was otherwise, like I said, a pretty overloaded pack as it is. Sometimes I will even keep a cell phone in the front here as well in the zippered pocket. So a little bit of a niche thing, but really for anybody wanting to offload some weight or just some volume, if you find your pack is bouncing or is uncomfortable, consider a belt, and you can carry spare nutrition. This one even has little loops for poles at the back here as well. So really great strategy for anybody wanting to spread the weight out a little bit. Now, I don't think there's anything I would change. I think we pretty much nailed it on this one, aside from, like I said, having the wrong size gaiters for the sand. But that's because I don't often run in gaiters, and I didn't do so very much during my training at all. But that's kind of the point. You want to come into this event having tested everything and figured everything out, whether it's foot care or nutrition, and of course, all of your gear. Nothing new on race day, and that definitely applies for the Moab 240.